My husband's funeral was interrupted by three women holding identical wedding rings. I have sat in the front row at a lot of difficult moments in my life. My mother's diagnosis, my father's retirement party where he cried and couldn't stop, the day I signed the papers for the house that was supposed to be ours forever. But nothing prepared me for sitting in the front row at my husband's funeral and watching three strangers walk through the door wearing the same ring as me. Not similar, not inspired by, identical. Same setting, same band, same proportions. The ring I had worn for 11 years on my left hand, which I had assumed was designed for me, chosen for me, existing only in one version in the entire world. 3 copies, 3 women, 1 funeral, and every single one of them thought they were the wife. Before I go any further, if this story is already making your jaw drop, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop your location in the comments. I genuinely love knowing where in the world you are when you're watching this. I'm Miriam. I'm 43 years old, and this is the story of the man I was married to for 11 years. And what I found out about him the day we buried him. Let me tell you about Thomas first, because I think you need to understand who I believed he was before you can understand how completely the ground shifted beneath me that morning. Thomas Hale was, by every measure I had available to me, a good man, warm, generous, present. The kind of husband who remembered the small things, the way I liked my coffee, the name of my college roommate's daughter, the anniversary of the day we met, which he marked every year with a single white tulip because that's what I'd been carrying the first time he saw me, at a farmer's market on a Saturday morning 14 years ago. He was a civil engineer. He traveled for work. That part is relevant and I'll come back to it. But when he was home, he was fully home. Phone down, eyes up. The kind of attention you don't realize is rare until you've been without it. We had one daughter. Her name is Bea. She was 9 when Thomas died. She is 11 now, and she has his laugh and his way of going still when she's thinking hard about something. And some days, that is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And some days it costs me everything I have. Thomas died on a Tuesday in November. A car accident on the highway, 40 minutes from home, on his way back from a project site. The call came at 6:47 in the evening. I was making pasta. Bea was doing homework at the kitchen table. I remember the exact sound the wooden spoon made when I set it on the counter. The funeral was 5 days later. Small church, 40 minutes from our home, the one Thomas had grown up attending and had come back to as an adult. I had organized everything myself. The readings, the flowers, the order of service. I had chosen a photograph for the program that I'd always loved. Him laughing at something off camera at a family barbecue 3 summers ago. I sat in the front pew with Bea on my left and Thomas's mother Eleanor on my right. Eleanor had been crying since the moment she arrived. She held my hand through the first hymn. I was watching the door. I don't know why. Instinct maybe. The need to know who had come to honor him. Friends I recognized, colleagues I'd met at work events, neighbors, a few faces I didn't know, but assumed were professional connections. And then, 20 minutes into the service, the door opened. A woman walked in alone, mid-30s, dark coat. She stood at the back for a moment scanning the room. Her eyes found the casket, and she pressed her hand to her mouth. I noticed her because she was crying before she'd even sat down. The particular grief of someone for whom the loss was immediate and physical, not managed or composed. I thought she must have known him well. She found a seat in the back row. 8 minutes later, the door opened again. Another woman, similar age, maybe a few years younger, red-rimmed eyes. She stood at the entrance and looked at the room with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not just grief, something more disoriented than grief. And then she walked to a pew on the left side, 3 rows behind me. I noticed her hand on the pew as she sat down. The ring, my ring. I looked at my own hand, then back at hers. The distance was too great to be certain. I told myself it was a coincidence, a similar style, nothing more. The service continued. The pastor spoke. Thomas's colleague gave a reading. I held Bea's hand and stared at the photograph on the program and tried to stay inside myself. Then the third woman arrived. She was older than the other 2, close to my age. She walked in with the particular deliberateness of someone who had almost not come, and had decided at the last moment that she had to. She stopped just inside the door, and her eyes went to me in the front row, and they stayed there for just a moment too long. She sat on the right side, midway back. I could see her hand from where I sat. Same ring. I looked at the woman in the back row. Same ring. I looked at my own hand. 3 identical rings in one room, and the man who had given them was lying in a casket at the front. The rest of the service happened around me. I heard the words. I stood when I was supposed to stand. I kept my hand in B's, and I kept my face composed because my daughter was 9 years old, and the only thing I was certain of in that moment was that whatever was happening, she would not see it break me here, not here. But I felt everything shifting, like a floor that looks solid but gives slightly under your weight. And you understand, in one cold instant, that it has been giving all along. After the service, Eleanor took B to greet family near the entrance. I stood beside the casket. I don't know how long. People came to offer condolences, and I received them and said the appropriate things. And then the woman from the back row was in front of me. She was shaking, slightly but visibly, the way a person shakes when they are holding something very large, very still. She said, "I need to ask you something and I'm sorry. I know this isn't the time, but I don't know when else." She held up her left hand. I held up mine. We stood there for a moment, the two of us looking at the same ring on 2 different hands. She said her name was Diane. She said she had been with Thomas for 6 years. She said she had believed they were married. She said she was so sorry. She was so sorry. She didn't know. I heard her words from a very strange distance. The way you hear things when your body has decided to protect your mind from the full impact of something. I said, "How long ago did you get married?" She said, 5 years ago last April. I had been married to Thomas for 11 years. The other woman, the one on the left side of the church, had found her way to us by then. Her name was Priya. She was 31. She said she and Thomas had been together for 3 years. She said he had told her his first marriage had ended years ago. She said she had a daughter. She had a daughter. I looked at her. She looked at me. Neither of us said anything for a moment. The third woman never approached us directly. I saw her watching from across the room, her hand pressed flat against her stomach. She left before I could speak to her. I didn't know her name yet. I would find it out later. Eleanor, Thomas's mother, was standing 15 feet away. She had watched the entire exchange. When I looked at her, she held my gaze for exactly 2 seconds and then looked away. She knew. I want to pause here and ask you something, because I think it matters. When the worst thing you can imagine happens, not the loss, but the betrayal inside the loss, what is your first feeling? Is it rage? Is it grief? Is it something else entirely? Because what I felt standing in that church with my husband's other wives was something I didn't expect. I felt clear, not calm. I was not calm, but clear. Like everything soft and uncertain had been burned away, and what was left was just structure. Just the bones of things. Tell me in the comments. I want to know. I drove home with B. I made her dinner. I read her 2 chapters of the book we were working through together. I sat beside her bed until she fell asleep. Then I went to the kitchen table and I started making a list. I am by profession a paralegal. I have spent 17 years organizing information for attorneys, building cases from documents, understanding how systems of evidence work. Thomas knew this about me. He had always said, affectionately, that I had the most organized mind of anyone he knew. I thought about that on the drive home. The affection in his voice when he said it. The possibility that it had also been a calculation, that he had understood better than most, that I would need evidence before I acted, that I was not the kind of person who moved on feeling alone. He was right about that. And it was the thing that was going to undo everything he had built. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name is Sandra Park, and she had been my professional contact for a decade before she became, that week, something much closer to essential. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. She said, "I need you to pull every document you have. Marriage certificate, tax filings, property records, joint accounts, insurance policies, everything." I already had them organized. I had been a paralegal for 17 years. Sandra said, "Of course you do." Over the next 2 weeks, the picture assembled itself with a terrible clarity. Thomas had been legally married to me, only to me. The other ceremonies had been conducted without legal marriage licenses, through officiants who were either unaware or, in one case, deliberately unlicensed. Diane and Priya had believed they were legally married. They were not. What they were, however, was financially entangled. Thomas had maintained separate accounts with each of them. He had contributed to household expenses in each home. He had, in 2 cases, been listed on leases. The money had come from a business account I had known existed but had never examined closely. Thomas had always handled the business side, and I understood now, allowed that because it had seemed like a reasonable division, and because I had trusted him. The business account contained significantly more than I had assumed. I also found the insurance policy. Thomas had taken out a life insurance policy 18 months before his death. A large one. The beneficiary was not me. It was not B. The beneficiary was a trust I had never heard of, registered in a state we had never lived in, with a trustee whose name I didn't recognize. Sandra took one look at it and said, "We need a forensic accountant." I had the same thought that I imagine many of you are having right now. He had been preparing, not for death. No one plans a car accident, but for departure. The insurance policy, the trust, the separate accounts. Thomas had been building an exit, and at some point over the last 18 months, he had decided he was going to use it. For whom? That was the question I needed to answer. I found Diane's contact information through the documentation she had given Sandra. We met for coffee 10 days after the funeral, just the 2 of us, without attorneys, because I needed to understand her version of events before I knew what I was dealing with. Diane was a kindergarten teacher, quiet, careful, the kind of person who chooses her words the way she chooses everything, deliberately, with attention to impact. She had met Thomas at a school fundraiser where he had been a donor. He had told her within the first month that he had been previously married and that it had ended amicably. He had told her his ex-wife had remarried and moved abroad. I had not remarried. I had not moved abroad. I had been living 40 minutes from the church where Diane had believed she was marrying the man she loved. She cried at the coffee shop, not from grief for Thomas. That, she told me, had evaporated the moment she understood what she had been standing inside of. She cried from something more specific and harder to name. The feeling of having built something real on a foundation that was not real. The question of what that meant for everything she believed she had experienced. I told her I understood that feeling. I did. Priya I met separately. She was 31. And her daughter was 4 years old. The daughter's name was Lily and she had Thomas's eyes. And I had to excuse myself to the restroom for 3 minutes when Priya showed me a photograph. Priya was the one who had found the 3rd woman. Her name was Catherine. She was 47. She had met Thomas 12 years ago, before me. And their relationship had ended, she believed, when he married someone else. She had moved on, remarried, divorced. And then Thomas had come back into her life 4 years ago. No ring this time, no ceremony, but a relationship she had believed was committed and exclusive. Catherine had come to the funeral because she had loved him once, and because grief doesn't require permission. She had seen the rings and understood immediately what they meant. She had left because she couldn't bear the weight of the room. When Priya found her and brought us all together, 4 women in a conference room at Sandra's office on a Thursday afternoon in December. The thing I remember most is the silence at the beginning of it. 4 women. 4 completely different versions of the same man. All of us sitting at the same table, looking at each other, understanding that the story we had each believed was the real one, had in fact been 1/4 of something none of us had agreed to. Sandra laid the documents in the center of the table. The trust, the insurance policy, the business accounts, the separate financial streams. She said, "The question is not who was wronged. You all were. The question is what we do with this. What we did with it took 4 months. I want to walk you through it because I think the methodology matters. 4 women, 1 attorney, Sandra, and a forensic accountant named James Whitfield, who had seen, as he put it on our first meeting, a lot in 20 years but not quite this exact configuration. The trust, James determined, had been structured to receive the insurance payout, and distributed to beneficiaries that Thomas had designated. When we traced those beneficiaries, we found 2 of them were Priya and her daughter Lily. One was a charitable organization neither of us had heard of, and one, the largest single allocation, was a name none of us recognized. It took James 3 weeks to identify that name. It was a woman in another state, 41 years old. No prior connection to any of us, no apparent connection to Thomas's professional life. A private individual with a small online presence and, when James dug further, a history of financial transactions, with Thomas's business account going back 9 years. 9 years. Thomas had been with me for 11, which meant that whatever this was had begun 2 years into our marriage. I sat with that number for a long time. 2 years in, when B was a baby and we were exhausted and fully intertwined, he had started building something else. I thought about the white tulips, the remembered details, the phone down, eyes up attention. I thought about how I had understood all of it as love. I still think some of it was. I think that's the hardest part. Not that he was a monster. Monsters are simpler. But that he was a man who was capable of real love and chose to distribute it across lives that should never have overlapped, and called it a system. The legal resolution took the shape that Sandra had anticipated. As the only legal spouse, I had standing that the others did not. But I used that standing in a specific way. I fought not to take everything, but to ensure that Priya and Lily were provided for, that the financial structures Thomas had built for them were protected, because a 4-year-old girl should not pay for her father's choices. Diane received a settlement from the business accounts that acknowledged her financial contributions to the relationship. Catherine asked for nothing and received what she had come for. Confirmation on the record of what had actually happened. The woman in the other state, Thomas's 9th-year secret, did not respond to Sandra's correspondence. That chapter remains, in some ways, unfinished. I have made a degree of peace with unfinished. Now, the twist. There is always something you don't see coming. I had thought I'd found everything. 4 months of forensic accounting, legal filings, documentation. I thought I understood the full architecture. I did not. In early March, 5 months after the funeral, Eleanor called me, Thomas's mother, the woman who had watched me stand in that church with Diane and Priya, and had held my gaze for 2 seconds before looking away. She asked if she could come to the house. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had made my first list, and she placed a sealed envelope in front of me. She said, "Thomas gave me this 4 years ago. He told me to give it to you if he died before he told you himself. He said he'd been trying to find a way to tell you for a long time." I looked at the envelope, my name in Thomas's handwriting. I looked at Eleanor. I said, "Did you know about all of it?" She was quiet for a moment. November. I picked up the envelope. I am November. I picked up the envelope. I am going to tell you what was in it, but I want to say something first. I have gone back and forth about whether to share this part. It is the part that is most complicated. The part that doesn't resolve cleanly. The letter was 6 pages long. Thomas's handwriting, dense and careful. The way he wrote everything. He did not justify what he had done. I want to be precise about that. He did not explain it in terms that were meant to excuse it. He described it, the psychology of it, the way it had begun as something he had told himself he could control and had become over years. A structure he no longer knew how to dismantle without destroying everything. He said he had tried to end each of the other relationships multiple times, that he had not been able to. He described that failure with a clarity that I found, reading it, both devastating and completely insufficient. He said the only person he had ever been afraid to lose was me. He said he understood that was not a defense. He said he was sorry in the way that people are sorry when they know the word is completely inadequate, but say it anyway, because there is no other word. I folded the letter. I put it back in the envelope. I put the envelope in the drawer where I keep important documents. I have not read it again. I have thought about what to do with it many times. Burn it, some part of me says. Another part says, it is the truest thing he ever gave you. Keep it. For now, it stays in the drawer. Here is what I know 2 years later. I know that I was loved, imperfectly and dishonestly. by a man who was not capable of being the person I believed he was. I know that B is 11 and brilliant and carries her father's love, and deserves to know, when she is old enough, a true version of who he was. I know that Diane sends me a card at Christmas, which I did not expect, and which has come to mean something I don't have a word for. I know that Priya's daughter Lily turned 6 last month, and that Priya texted me a photo, and that I looked at it for a long time before I responded. I know that the ring is in the same drawer as the letter. I know that I have not decided what to do with either of them. And I know this: the woman who sat in the front pew and held her daughter's hand, and kept her face composed through the worst hour of her life, that woman did not fall apart. Not that day, not after. She went home, made dinner, read 2 chapters, and then sat down at a kitchen table and started building the truth from whatever pieces were available. That is the only version of this story I know how to be proud of. I'm Miriam. I'm 43, and the ring is in the drawer. If this story hit you somewhere real, if you are sitting with your own version of a letter in a drawer, or a ring you don't know what to do with, leave a comment. I read every single one, and I promise you are not alone in this. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. See you in the next one.